Awesome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kate the Great Aquin, and this is Family Legacy Compass. Thank you for joining us today. With me, I have an amazing guest. I call him a brother and a friend. I also call him Captain Collins. So I'll go ahead and ask him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Kate. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Simply put, regular guy Collins Sakwe. It's who I am. Grateful to be here. Yeah, that's just who I am.
Awesome. So let's go into our first question. Today, we're talking about how Black men, African men, Cameroonian men navigate divorce, especially in the diaspora. So, my very first question is going to be centered around toxic masculinity. What exactly does that mean to the average Cameroonian man?
I think that's a very heavy loaded question, I must say, but I would like to approach that from a perspective of human nature itself, right? How do we arrive at the definition of being toxic? I think there are certain things that have been happening which have gone on either unnoticed
Right.
or we just don't talk about them. Consequently, we normalize them, right? And they become habit formed processes, which consequently can be perceived as toxic. Now,
Okay.
can I say an individual in isolation is toxic? I'm not a clinical scientist, but I would say it depends. It depends on the circumstance.
Uh huh.
It depends on the person, and it also depends on their convictions, right? And so when you approach these things together and you now put the Cameroonian masculinity into it, which I think it's a very complex topic to look at, or a very complex individual to define, right? Because
Yeah.
by virtue of our multicultural diversity,
Uh huh.
we cannot just sit and say all the men are one, neither can we say
No.
all the women are the same. Now, depending on the individual, the circumstance, and the situation, I think we can now identify the traits. Now, coming to the traits, we can talk about specifics. We cannot definitely acknowledge that we grew up in, and I would speak for some, right? I can't say all.
Of course.
Some grew up in cultures or in environments where the definition of who a man is was very absent. Okay. Um, First off, let's even take it even in the Western context. When you meet someone, you ask them, who is a man?
A
I-
man is
I'll
many
tell
things.
you, it means so many things, right? So we all have a jacked up, messed up, screwed over definition of what masculinity is. But we definitely have an opportunity by virtue of the context in which we grew up in to realize that masculinity in itself is something you learn, you develop into it, in my opinion.
Right.
And consequently, in that process, those stereotypes that you grew up in
Uh huh.
with, that's an opportunity for you to actually confront them, but certainly not ignore them.
Okay.
So I wouldn't really say in a nutshell that there's something as a toxic masculine identity from a Cameroonian male perspective.
Let's look. I understand how you're struggling to avoid the whole conversation, but I'm bringing you back into it. Okay. So let's look at it from the perspective of family life,
Okay.
specifically marriage. In that context, average person on the streets, a toxic man, as we put it. I really want us to touch on the common issues that we face as a community.
Okay.
And if we have to talk about that, then we have to spell it out in a language that they understand. Now I'm talking about our audience. So when we're looking at toxic masculinity in marriage, especially overseas, what's the context? What have you heard? What's your experience?
Okay. So I will start with what we consider the westernization trap. we live in a society we were not born in for the most part.
Yeah.
And consequently, everything that we were taught or what everything we informed ourselves about through movies, through pictures, through stories, right? Um, created a stereotype which becomes a westernization trap. And so from that westernization trap, we now have the opportunity to really look at those stereotypes that can constitute the bedrock for what we think is toxic.
Right.
Because up until when we got into the Western society, we more or less normalized things, right? So I'll give you one stereotype, which I think you're looking for it, right? So one of those is the identity of a man, being a man in our Cameroon, in our typical
Yes.
family circles. And I say this to all the men who are watching or listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am not shooting a bullet at you, okay? I'm not speaking for you. We're
We're
just
just
looking
keeping
at
it real.
general, right?
Yeah, we're keeping it real. No, we're not pointing fingers.
So
Yeah.
when we were growing up, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
family circle,
Yeah.
I think there was this identity or this notion that the male child, right, was designed to be this poster child for what will be the success standard for the family. Now, I say this with so much respect
Mm-hmm.
and caution to what women represent, because the truth of the matter is, I'm a firm believer that women are the backbone of society.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't do without each other. So let that be clear. So men growing up with the stereotype, uh, um, we understand that you have to be strong. You don't show your emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you work hard, you provide, and that's it.
You call the shots.
Consequently, you should be glorified, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, they don't tell you that, but more or less you see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I use an example which really cuts through my heart. We see the stereotype even in our public school systems. A boy and a girl, male or female student, one gets pregnant, the female student gets pregnant, impregnated more or less, sometimes by a fellow student, and if not even a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
right? What happens to that female student?
Getting
She drops out
dragged,
of school for the
shamed.
most part.
Yeah.
The social stigma and everything that goes with it. But the guy, on the other hand, is, for lack of better terms, celebrated as a hero, right? And I think we need to reverse that cycle and start saying, no, that's a zero, that's a zero effect behavior right there. Okay, it's poor. I think the girl child should be given the place that she deserves. Now, coming back to the male. So we grow up with this stereotype and this status mindset that we are it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you come to the West, consequently, the westernization trap. You get in the system, and now you're in a system that says, no, 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 no. The reverse is true, right?
Right.
And now you find each and every one caught up in what I consider culture shock. I don't think the women necessarily want to be disrespectful to the men. And I
Okay.
also don't believe that the men really want to be abusive and toxic to the women. I think both genders are caught up in a social reality they are struggling with. The pace of work, pace of life, you're constantly on the go.
Mm-hmm.
And so the value added proposition in relations or in how both genders interact is where we're lost. And consequently, we now start identifying toxic patterns. So one of them would be, I look at my partner and I say, okay, why do you talk to me this way? If I say, why do you talk to me this way? It doesn't mean, why do you talk to me this way because I'm a man.
Mm-hmm.
It just means, why would you talk to another human like that? I think if we start
Absolutely.
reversing the thought process, our choice of words, we
Yeah.
would think differently.
I
The
agree.
way you talk to your partner, a male at home, husband, boyfriend, fiance,
Yeah.
is that the same way you would talk to your boss at work? No, I bet you not. Same thing applies to the man. The way you treat your spouse, the way you
Right.
talk to her. If you did that to someone else, would that be acceptable? So that's where I think we all get caught up and lost.
I agree with you. However, let me things that we deal with.
Yeah. Man, you had with that.
I've
I
heard people
love it.
say, my husband said, I cannot talk to him the way I talk to my employees, but then you hear the story and you're like, wow, what was he even thinking doing that stuff? You understand? So let's talk about that.
So two things, value and communication. I think what we value and cherish, we give it a special attention.
Absolutely.
Let's put the boss factor to the side. I think it's all about value, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, if we truly value each other, we will make it a point to develop ourselves to be of value to each other. It doesn't mean we will be perfect. Okay. The other part is communication.
Uh-huh.
Most of the times when we hear the issues that we're dealing with, men are this way, the women are that way. I want to speak about men here, okay?
Right.
Um, we are, for the most part, we're far from what the stereotypes that society tends to give us, right? I can tell you there's a difference between the boy who grew up to a certain age and still acts boyish, and there's a man who picks up the responsibility as
Right.
early as 14. I'll tell you, I started learning how to be a man at 14 because I saw patterns which served as an inspiration to
Uh-huh.
me to start working on those things that I would like to see in the future, right?
Okay.
So, value and communication. We need to, men, first of all, take ownership
Okay.
of ourselves, of our struggles. It's not about throwing rocks, it's not about pointing fingers, it's about ownership.
Uh-huh.
We have to take ownership. We have to take ownership of the fact that we met a beautiful woman who lived with her parents or who was raised by her parents, who experienced her own chapters of life, some interesting, others not so interesting. And if it is true that women are more attached to their feelings, all it takes is just a little spark to trigger that. Men are more fascinated with their ego. Now, when people say ego, I say be careful. Not all ego is bad. Ego is also self awareness.
Right.
Now, if you take self awareness the wrong way, then it becomes toxic. But if you are aware that, okay, I have a communication problem. If you tell me I have a communication problem and you help me understand how you want us to communicate,
Uh,
and I don't take ownership,
uh-huh.
that's not ego. That's pride. That's trauma. And I think that's what you were trying to hit on ever since.
Yeah, I'm trying to
How do
get you
we
there.
uncover that trauma?
Exactly.
We grew up in a society, we grew up in a system where, come on, what? What happened? Whatever, get over it. And then it bottles up, it bottles up. And then now, boom, you're in
Yeah.
a relationship. There's that trauma, both men like women. So
Uh,
to me, I look at it this way: come to the table, focus on how we add value, focus on how we communicate, and take the time to take inventory of, okay, let's get out of the fault finding mission. How many times do we sit down as partners, couples, to really say, I want to hear from you how I make you feel?
barely. And
But
truly,
somehow we mystically demand results.
exactly. And truly, I don't blame either of the persons involved in a relationship because they were not taught to sit down and communicate that way.
Okay.
So when I'd asked the question about case study, me talking to my person like a boss, right? That does not necessarily mean that my communication was rude. I don't think that the way your boss talks to you is rude, correct?
Sometimes it is.
No, let's not look at the bad side of it. Let's look at
Okay.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
typical side of it.
Generally. Yeah.
Of course, there's mutual respect at work.
Correct.
So when your boss says something to you, it's easy to take it. And this is me trying to, you know, create a typical scenario. You have a female boss at work. She communicates to you. It's like giving instructions, asking you to do stuff. Now, when you come home, because your person, as a man, you're dealing with a woman. Case study, you're not doing things the right way. So that's why she's stepping in. And she talks to you as well. Calmly, nicely, but she hits the nail. You still come off as she's controlling, she's bossy, and all of that stuff. That's where I was going. It wasn't about you being rude or rash and all of that. No. So is it still a thing of pride? Is it still a thing of maybe the men refusing to take accountability? What is
Okay.
it? What do you call that kind of situation?
Again, I go to growth.
Okay.
Okay. Because I can't speak in general. Each
Well,
case is specific, right?
it
It's
is,
gotta,
but
we can
again,
agree on that, right?
this is a general conversation, so we're keeping
Yeah.
it general and we're keeping it real. You understand? So let's just put it there.
Okay. So I think it's all about the individual.
Okay.
It's all about the individual. And
Uh-huh.
I say this again. It will not be fair
Right.
if we take an individual to represent an entire gender.
We cannot, but we're looking at,
The
I can safely say
stereotypes.
50%. I can
Okay, yeah,
safely say
agree,
50%. Right.
agree. Again, I can't really speak as to why they do that because, like I said earlier, ego and then trauma, right? Trauma.
So let's not focus on blaming. Let's focus on how we can fix situations like that because they're
Great.
happening every day.
Okay. Number one, I'm a firm believer. If you are not getting some type of mental health assessment
Okay. We touched
twice a
that one.
year,
Mm-hmm.
every 6 months, I'll be candid with you.
I
We are
agree.
good with changing oil, okay, replacing oil in our cars. We are good with keeping up with the latest technology gadgets.
Mm.
We are good with the latest hairstyles and
Yep.
facial cuts and jacket and this. But how many times how much do we invest in us?
Yeah.
Life is real. We get to a certain age,
Uh-huh.
our health begins to face new realities,
Yep.
social responsibilities, you know, kids, employment, your employment situation, you name it. So many things play.
Right.
Not to justify someone not behaving how they're supposed to.
Uh-huh.
I think if we focus on the solution, which I call the growth factor, in other words, partnership in growth.
Mm.
We stop looking at partnership in love. What does partnership in love mean? First of all, we don't even talk finances, but we're in love.
Don't go there.
Okay, we're gonna get there. All right. No, no. Okay.
My money is my money. Your
We
money is our
Your
money.
money's your money. Your money's okay. Whatever. It's okay. Hey, okay. But
Right.
you see, there are some things that, in my opinion, right,
Mm-hmm.
we've been so stuck in our ways because of how we've looked at the world. Hey, no disrespect. Strong, independent, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. You want to put, why do you have to prove yourself that you're strong?
Let's call it
Why
what
do you
it is.
have to prove
Strong,
yourself that you're
independent black woman.
independent?
Yeah.
Okay, you said it. I always say this, black woman, with all the love and respect I have for all races,
Yeah.
every woman is an incarnate of God's goodness to humanity.
Yeah.
Nothing happens in the world unless a woman breathes it.
Absolutely.
But together, we have to get to a point of partnership in growth.
Uh-huh.
We have to, I'll put it this way. Um, like, I used to be married before. And I used to share this analogy with my spouse then. I said, we got to look at a relationship from a triangular perspective. At the top of the triangle, which is the tip, is God.
Right.
At the base of each end of the triangle, you, me. But you see, every day we're struggling to meet with God. It's not a straight, you see how
It's a slope.
it slants.
Yeah.
So we can go that way and slide and fall, slide and fall. But at the base right here is us.
Uh-huh.
How do we connect with each other? And if you're not able to connect with each other at this point, which is okay, that's a time when you really need to focus and take it back to God.
Yeah.
Because if we talk to God more about our partner like we did to other people,
Mm.
I think we'll see some
Mm.
changes.
Mm. That's it. That's it. You hit
If
the
we
nail.
did,
Yeah.
and this is my own challenge to brothers, society is real. You may not have been the cause of whatever experience you had in life, but show is yours. How do we own it? When do we start to own the process? I think it's a very powerful movement that we have to get on.
It
And it
is.
starts at home, mothers. How do you communicate to that young king at home? I know sometimes some fathers have done things which, have hurt mothers. But it's one thing, if you have a son, the way you relate with him is a blueprint, or the way he sees you relate with other men,
Yeah.
especially his father,
Yeah.
is a blueprint
Mm-hmm.
of what he takes into society.
Absolutely.
So we have to get into that partnership model for our growth. We have to
Absolutely.
understand that we're not in the relation to fix our partner. We're in the relation to have an experience with our partner. And if we can't get the result we're looking for, let's learn how to take a step back,
Mm.
focus on something else.
Something else like what?
Hey, why don't we go for a walk?
Okay.
Why don't we play game like Ludo, cards, or whatever? There used to be things that would get us to be human,
Right.
to be friendly. And I think that's the other part, right? We get into our relationships. Most men seek that friendship, that closeness with their spouses.
Okay.
They want to be vulnerable in your presence.
Hmm. I don't think I agree with that part.
Tell me why not?
I've not heard a lot of stories about men wanting to be vulnerable, and it comes from that place of upbringing.
Okay.
Men were taught to, be quiet and just show tough love, not express emotions. If you feel pain, regardless of how you feel, you just toughen up. It's like you don't say I'm sorry, you don't say I love you, you don't say I'm hurting. You don't need to let people see you cry. I don't know how many men I've seen cry, for real. I mean, it's a good thing if men start being vulnerable with their spouses or partners. But I'm yet to see or hear women talk about that a lot. So if that's something that you're used to, you've seen it with maybe the men around you, or you practice it. How can a man out there be soft with their partner?
Really great question. It starts by acknowledging that we too have our struggles. Uh, some time back, I started an initiative I called Man Cave Fellowship, right? Because as you look again, the westernization trap, when you walk into a house, beautiful as it looks, there's always one spot that's called a man cave, right? And that space is intended for him to be himself, right? He can set up his little bar, as many TV screens as he wants to, his football stuff here and there. And when his
Yeah, his
friends come
personal
over,
space.
that's his space, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's my question. If your house is truly a home, why do you have to live in a cave? Why do you have to go seclude yourself somewhere? Because a cave is
It's a
withdrawn.
hideout.
It's a
Yeah.
hideout. Why do you have to hide? I'm not saying it's bad to have that space. Now, it could be just space for him to, do his thing and all whatnot. But I say if that becomes the norm, then we are living in caves, not only here, and because society says if you say anything, you're weak, what do? Zip it. What happens? I heard a great man say this the other day. He said, men begin to go down the path of what's called sex, alcohol, and silence.
Mm.
Sex becomes what? The way out, stress relief. Alcohol,
Yeah.
you know what? That's the only time I feel myself, or that's how I can silence. Because society says, if you speak or if you cry, you weak. I say this, only strong men cry.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
We got to stop this. A lot of brothers are struggling from the military background. We have this culture or this time of the year when we talk about, 22 push-ups, suicide awareness, and all of that. Yeah, it's good we're doing the push-ups, but let's come back to society. Let's encourage one another. And when I say men want to be vulnerable, I'm not just talking about crying.
Yeah.
They just want to have a friendly environment.
What is a friendly environment in a man's context? Because that's another, confusing statement. Just like most of our men say, I just want a woman who respects me. But again, if you start asking what's respect, everybody has a different definition to that. So let's talk about that. What does a man mean when he says, I just want a friend, somebody I can be vulnerable with? What exactly is he looking for?
Okay.